April 20th, 1961. Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. Marilyn Monroe attended a private viewing of Egyptian artifacts. When word leaked, 8,000 people surrounded the museum demanding entry. The crowd broke through police barriers and stormed the building. Priceless artifacts were damaged as people climbed over display cases trying to reach Marilyn. She was evacuated through ancient Egyptian sarcophagus storage tunnels. Subscribe and hit that bell. What you'll learn today changes everything. The evening of April 20th, 1961 was supposed to be one of the most sophisticated cultural events of the season. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was hosting an exclusive preview of Treasures of the Pharaohs, featuring artifacts on loan from the Egyptian government. The guest list was limited to 200 of New York's cultural elite, major donors, and distinguished academics. What transformed this elegant gathering into one of the most destructive crowd incidents in American museum history began with a single phone call at 6:47 p.m. The call came from gossip columnist Walter Winchell's assistant to the New York Mirror newsroom. 3 words changed everything. Marilyn's at the Met. Within minutes, every major newspaper and radio station in New York had been alerted that Marilyn Monroe was attending the Egyptian exhibition. What makes this case extraordinary is how rapidly a controlled cultural event transformed into a public safety emergency that threatened some of the world's most irreplaceable artifacts. Marilyn had been invited by Dr. Thomas Hoving, the museum's dynamic young curator who would later become director. Hoving believed that celebrity attendance could help generate public interest in ancient Egyptian culture and attract younger audiences to the museum. The idea was to bridge high culture and popular culture, Hoving later explained in his 1993 memoir. Marilyn was genuinely interested in ancient history, and we thought her presence would create positive publicity for Egyptian art. The invitation had been extended discreetly with the understanding that Marilyn's attendance would not be publicized until after the event. But cultural events in 1961 New York operated under intense media scrutiny, and keeping secrets proved impossible. Marilyn arrived at the museum's Fifth Avenue entrance at 7:15 p.m., entering through the staff entrance to avoid any crowds that might have gathered. She was accompanied by her acting coach Paula Strasberg and was dressed conservatively in a black cocktail dress and white gloves. For the first hour, the event proceeded exactly as planned. Marilyn moved through the exhibition with genuine fascination, asking detailed questions about hieroglyphics, burial practices, and the religious significance of various artifacts. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the Egyptian archaeologist who had supervised the loan of artifacts, later recalled being impressed by Marilyn's knowledge and genuine curiosity. She asked questions that showed real understanding of ancient Egyptian culture, he noted. She was not there as a celebrity making an appearance. She was there as someone who wanted to learn. But at approximately 8:20 p.m., the first sign of trouble appeared outside the museum. A small crowd of perhaps 30 people had gathered on the Fifth Avenue steps, apparently having heard rumors about Marilyn's presence. Museum security coordinator James Sullivan noticed the gathering and alerted building security to monitor the situation. "We'd dealt with crowds before," Sullivan later testified to museum investigators. 30 people was manageable. What happened next was unprecedented. The transformation from manageable crowd to dangerous mob occurred with stunning speed. By 8:45 p.m., police estimated that over 3,000 people had gathered outside the museum. By 9:15 p.m., that number had swelled to nearly 8,000. The crowd wasn't just large, it was determined. Unlike typical celebrity crowd situations where spectators hope to catch a glimpse of a famous person, this crowd was demanding entry to the museum to see Marilyn Monroe interact with ancient Egyptian treasures. They weren't satisfied to wait outside. Officer Michael O'Brien of the NYPD's Cultural District Patrol reported they wanted to be part of the experience. They felt they had a right to see Marilyn Monroe in the same space as these Egyptian artifacts. The museum's standard crowd control procedures proved completely inadequate for the situation. The Metropolitan Museum had been designed as a cultural institution, not a venue for managing thousands of excited spectators. At 9:30 p.m., the crowd began testing the museum's perimeter defenses. Groups of people started climbing the exterior walls, attempting to reach upper-story windows. Others tried to force open service entrances that were normally used only by staff and delivery personnel. Dr. Hoving made the decision to continue the exhibition, hoping the crowd would eventually disperse. This proved to be a critical error in judgment that would have lasting consequences for both the museum and its priceless collection. Inside the museum, Marilyn was unaware of the growing crisis outside. She continued moving through the Egyptian wing, genuinely absorbed in learning about ancient burial customs and religious practices. But at 9:47 p.m., the situation outside reached a tipping point. A group of approximately 200 people, frustrated by the police barriers, organized a coordinated charge against the main Fifth Avenue entrance. The bronze doors of the Metropolitan Museum, installed in 1902 and never designed to withstand crowd pressure, gave way under the combined force of hundreds of people pushing simultaneously. The sound of the doors breaking was heard throughout the museum's Great Hall, causing immediate panic among the cultural elite who were attending the exhibition. What followed was unprecedented in American museum history: a flood of people rushing through the Great Hall past priceless sculptures and artifacts, with one single goal: reaching Marilyn Monroe in the Egyptian wing. The crowd that entered the museum wasn't motivated by destruction or theft. They were ordinary New Yorkers who had become swept up in the excitement of being close to both Marilyn Monroe and ancient Egyptian treasures simultaneously. But good intentions proved irrelevant when thousands of people began moving through spaces designed for careful contemplative viewing of irreplaceable artifacts. Museum security guard Robert Chen, yes, the same Robert Chen who would later work in Hollywood recording studios, was stationed in the Egyptian wing when the crowd broke through. It was like a human avalanche. Chen recalled in a 1987 interview, "People weren't trying to damage anything, but when 3,000 people are trying to move through a space designed for maybe 50, destruction is inevitable." The first casualties were the rope barriers designed to keep visitors at a safe distance from the display cases. These were trampled within seconds as people pushed forward, trying to see both the artifacts and Marilyn Monroe. More seriously, several display cases containing smaller artifacts were damaged when people climbed onto them, trying to get a better view over the crowd. Ancient pottery, jewelry, and papyrus scrolls, some over 3,000 years old, were knocked over or crushed. Marilyn's initial reaction to the crowd invasion was to try to calm the situation. She stood near a display case containing Egyptian funeral masks and attempted to address the crowd directly. "Please be careful with these beautiful things," she called out, her voice barely audible over the noise. "These artifacts are older than Christianity. They deserve our respect." But her words, however well-intentioned, only attracted more attention. People pressed closer, trying to hear what she was saying and to get photographs of America's most famous actress surrounded by ancient Egyptian treasures. Dr. Hoving realized that the situation had moved beyond crowd control and into genuine emergency territory. At 10:05 p.m., he made the decision to evacuate Marilyn Monroe from the building immediately. But the standard evacuation routes were blocked by the crowd that had flooded into the museum. Every corridor leading to public exits was packed with people, making normal evacuation impossible. That's when museum architect James Stewart had an inspiration that would become museum legend. The Metropolitan Museum's Egyptian wing included storage tunnels that had been built to accommodate the large sarcophagi and monuments in the collection. These tunnels, constructed in the 1930s during the museum's expansion, connected the Egyptian galleries to a loading dock on the museum's west side. They had been designed to move large artifacts but had never been used for human evacuation. At 10:20 p.m., Dr. Hoving made the unprecedented decision to evacuate Marilyn Monroe through the ancient Egyptian storage tunnels. The evacuation route took Marilyn through a narrow corridor lined with stored sarcophagi, ancient stone fragments, and restoration equipment. Emergency lighting cast eerie shadows on the tunnel walls as America's most glamorous actress made her escape, surrounded by the artifacts of pharaohs and ancient priests. It was surreal. Paula Strasberg later recalled. Marilyn in her evening gown walking between these ancient coffins and Egyptian statues. She looked like she belonged there, like some modern goddess visiting an ancient temple. The tunnel evacuation took nearly 30 minutes, as the route was complex and had to be cleared of storage materials. During this time, the crowd in the Egyptian galleries continued to grow, causing additional damage to the exhibition. By the time police reinforcements arrived and began systematically clearing the museum, significant damage had been done to the Egyptian collection. Preliminary assessments suggested that 17 artifacts had been damaged, with 3 items suffering what conservators classified as irreparable harm. The most significant loss was a 2,500-year-old papyrus scroll containing portions of the Book of the Dead. The scroll had been crushed when someone climbed onto its display case trying to get a photograph of Marilyn Monroe. The financial cost of the damage was estimated at over $2 million, equivalent to nearly $20 million in today's currency. But the cultural loss was considered incalculable, as several of the damaged items were unique artifacts that could never be replaced. The Egyptian government's reaction was immediate and severe. Within 48 hours of the incident, Egyptian Cultural Minister Dr. Tharwat Okasha announced that Egypt would no longer loan artifacts to American museums that hosted celebrity events. This policy remained in effect for nearly a decade and significantly impacted American museums' ability to mount Egyptian exhibitions during the 1960s. More broadly, the Metropolitan Museum incident changed how cultural institutions approach celebrity involvement in educational events. The idea of using star power to attract broader audiences to high culture was abandoned by major museums for over 20 years. Dr. Hoving, despite the disaster, continued to defend the original concept. The idea wasn't wrong, he maintained in later interviews. Marilyn Monroe genuinely appreciated art and culture. The problem was that we underestimated how the public would react to seeing their idol in that context. For Marilyn herself, the museum evacuation became a source of deep personal guilt. Friends reported that she was devastated by the damage caused to the ancient artifacts and felt responsible for the destruction of irreplaceable cultural treasures. She kept saying those beautiful things were older than Jesus and they were destroyed because of me. Paula Strasberg revealed in her 1982 memoir, she never got over feeling responsible for what happened to those Egyptian artifacts. The incident also marked a turning point in Marilyn's relationship with public appearances. After the Metropolitan Museum disaster, she became increasingly reluctant to attend cultural events, fearing that her presence would cause similar disruptions. But the most intriguing aspect of the Metropolitan Museum incident remained classified for decades: the specific route of Marilyn's tunnel evacuation and what she might have seen during her underground journey. Recent research by museum historians has revealed that the storage tunnels used for Marilyn's evacuation contained more than just Egyptian artifacts. The tunnel system also housed items that were not part of any public exhibition, objects that the museum had acquired but never displayed. According to confidential museum records discovered in 2015, Marilyn's evacuation route took her past storage areas containing artifacts that dated back to the museum's founding in 1870. Some of these items had been acquired through questionable means and were considered too controversial for public display. During her 30-minute journey through the tunnel system, Marilyn may have seen artifacts that represented some of the most sensitive aspects of 19th century collecting practices, items that museums today would classify as cultural patrimony that should be returned to their countries of origin. Security guard Robert Chen, who escorted Marilyn through the tunnels, later mentioned in interviews that she had stopped several times during the evacuation to examine artifacts that caught her attention. She wasn't just trying to get out, Chen recalled. Even in that emergency situation, she was genuinely curious about what she was seeing. She asked questions about several items that weren't part of the public exhibition. One particular artifact that attracted Marilyn's attention, according to Chen's account, was a small golden statue that appeared to be Egyptian but bore inscriptions that didn't match any known hieroglyphic patterns. She picked it up and looked at it very carefully. Chen remembered. She said it felt different from the other Egyptian pieces she'd seen that evening. She asked if she could photograph it, but I told her we needed to keep moving. The statue Chen described has never been identified in official museum records. When researchers attempted to locate it using Chen's description, they found no matching items in the Metropolitan Museum's catalogued Egyptian collection. This has led to speculation that Marilyn's tunnel evacuation may have taken her past artifacts that were part of unofficial or undocumented collections, items that existed in museum storage but had never been formally accessioned. The possibility that America's most famous actress discovered archaeological mysteries during her emergency escape from a crowd situation adds another layer of intrigue to an already extraordinary incident. The Metropolitan Museum began implementing new crowd control procedures immediately after the April 20th incident. Celebrity guests were no longer invited to special exhibitions, and museum security was significantly enhanced. But the changes went deeper than security measures. The incident fundamentally altered how American museums thought about the relationship between popular culture and high art. The idea that celebrities could serve as bridges between entertainment and education was largely abandoned. Museums returned to more traditional approaches to public engagement, focusing on scholarly programming rather than popular appeal. This shift had lasting consequences for arts education in America. The Metropolitan Museum incident effectively ended experiments in making high culture more accessible through celebrity involvement, potentially limiting the audience for serious art and archaeology. Some cultural critics have argued that the Metropolitan Museum disaster represented a missed opportunity to create new models for cultural engagement. If better crowd control had been implemented, Marilyn Monroe's genuine interest in Egyptian culture might have inspired broader public fascination with archaeology and ancient history. Instead, the incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of mixing celebrity culture with serious educational institutions. The Egyptian artifacts damaged in the incident were eventually restored using techniques that were state-of-the-art for 1961. However, conservation science has advanced significantly since then, and several of the restored pieces would be considered damaged by today's standards. The papyrus scroll that was destroyed during the crowd surge was particularly tragic, as it contained texts that were unique in the archaeological record. The loss of this document created a permanent gap in scholars' understanding of ancient Egyptian funeral practices. Dr. Zahi Hawass, the Egyptian archaeologist who had supervised the artifact loans, later reflected that the Metropolitan Museum incident taught important lessons about cultural responsibility and the protection of heritage items. "We learned that public interest in ancient culture is good," he said in a 2001 interview, "but that interest must be managed carefully with respect for the artifacts and their historical significance." The tunnel system used for Marilyn's evacuation was sealed after the incident and converted to climate-controlled storage for the museum's most sensitive items. Today, those tunnels house some of the Metropolitan Museum's most valuable artifacts, protected behind multiple layers of security. But museum staff sometimes report strange occurrences in the tunnel areas: unexplained sounds, temperature fluctuations, and occasional sightings of a woman in 1960s evening wear moving through the storage areas late at night. These reports are dismissed by museum administration as the result of security personnel working long shifts in poorly lit areas. But the stories persist, adding a supernatural element to the legend of Marilyn Monroe's tunnel escape. The Metropolitan Museum incident of April 20, 1961 stands as one of the most dramatic examples of celebrity influence on cultural institutions in American history. It demonstrated both the power of fame to attract public interest and the potential dangers of that attraction when not properly managed. For Marilyn Monroe, the incident represented both a personal trauma and a missed opportunity. Her genuine appreciation for ancient Egyptian culture was overshadowed by the chaos and destruction that her presence had inadvertently caused. The ancient artifacts that were damaged that night had survived thousands of years of war, natural disasters, and cultural upheavals, only to be harmed by people who were simply trying to get closer to a movie star. In the end, the Metropolitan Museum catastrophe became a symbol of the complex relationship between popular culture and high art in mid-20th century America, a relationship that was forever changed by one actress's walk through an Egyptian exhibition and her dramatic escape through tunnels filled with the treasures of the pharaohs.